So, The King of Staten Island is the latest comedy from Judd Apatow. But I guess we kind of almost got to put like comedy in quotes here, because like if you've noticed from like Judd Apatow's previous films, they're much less on the comedic side and more kind of on like the more somber, darkly comedic side, where it's not so much that it's a flat out comedy as much as it is just straight up drama, and there's a few jokes along the way. But hey, for laying into that melodrama, sometimes it actually works. So it's actually pretty intrigued to see where he would go with this film, especially since it focuses on the life of a younger character. It always felt like Apatow's films were kind of like scaling more towards like the older crowd in like their 40s, and here we kind of like take it back at least a little bit to like the life of a 20-year-old who isn't quite sure what to do with his life. So the story concerns Scott Carlin, who's played here by Pete Davidson. You might recognize Pete Davidson from Saturday Night Live. And Davidson, I always felt, was one of those actors who, like, it always felt like he could just play one role. Like, I could never see him being that versatile on Saturday Night Live to play a whole bunch of different characters and impressions. It always felt like he was just playing the same character. But I think that could work well for a film if you find the right role for him. And I think this kind of fits his style. I think this feels very natural for him, especially with Apatow films. You know that the way he directs, he wants to find characters. Wants to find actors that can feel natural playing these types of characters. And he works pretty well for Scott. Like, Scott is this guy in his mid-20s who basically, he feels like his life has fallen apart. His dad was a firefighter. He was killed in a fire when he was a kid, and he basically lives with his single mom, played by Marissa Tomei, and he has a younger sister who's now gone off to college. And he feels like there's nothing that's gonna come for him in this life. Basically, he has an ambition to become a tattoo artist. Like, he has this ridiculous vision to make a cross between a tattoo parlor and a restaurant, because he says like, "Oh, it's never been done before. I could totally do it." But the problem is, he's not very good as a tattoo artist. Like, he practices on his friends, and they show off some of the stuff he tried. Like, he screws up like an Obama tattoo where like the eyes are too far apart. Sometimes he does decent stuff. Like, at one point he draws like a cat around a belly button. So like the belly button is the cat's butthole. Get it? There's some easy comedy there. But mostly he doesn't really have much drive in his life. He spends most of his time just getting high with his friends, and just slacking off. Just doesn't really have much that he wants to do with his life. And it's kind of hard to empathize with him to some degree, because, like, I mean, he's still conflicted about his dad. It's clear that he has those issues. But then he makes a lot of, like, questionable choices. Like, he's clear, like, he doesn't really go against when, like, his group of friends start, like, bullying other kids. Like, at one point, a kid comes by and he wants to buy some drugs, but they give him a hard time because they don't like his brother, and they hassle him, and they want his shoes. There's a scene where it's really hard to watch, where Scott makes the bad call of, he runs across this little kid who comes across him, and the kid basically says, "Oh, I want a tattoo." And Scott's like, "Oh, sure, I'll give you a tattoo." And he starts giving it to him, and the kid freaks out and he runs away. And it's such a hard scene to watch, especially since one of Scott's friends ends that scene by saying, "I regret my friendship with you guys." And I can't help but feel like you really have to question, is that supposed to be a punchline, or is that legitimate? Because I kind of feel legitimate about that. I would regret being friends with these people, especially since that comes up later. His life kind of seems to get back on track, though, once he meets the kid's father, Ray Bishop, who's played by Bill Burr. They don't get along. But then Ray kind of makes a relationship work with Scott's mom, Margie. And soon they connect really well. I mean, and then she discovers that Ray is a firefighter. So she's debating, how is she going to break this to Scott? Because Scott, he doesn't really think highly of firefighters. He feels like, because his dad was one, that he died on the job, and he feels like his life was betrayed because of that. So he's not really cool with this Ray guy becoming his dad. And like Bill Burr, again, great casting here for a firefighter. Not just because Bill Burr can kind of like rock that kind of that mustache that just screams firefighter. But just like the attitude and the conflicting nature that Burr usually brings to his performances really works here as well. Now, true to Apatow comedies, all the characters here feel very complicated and conflicted about their lives. Scott tries to bring his life around by becoming a waiter. Doesn't really work out that well for him. Then he thinks, well, maybe I could, like, slowly the film pushes him towards getting more involved with the fire department and trying to make something more of his life. But we can kind of see this coming. Like, eventually he's gonna start working with firefighters, and he's gonna start realizing that there's more to their lives. We kind of sort of come to this realization a little bit early, like when one of the earlier scenes when Ray is trying to connect with Scott, he takes him to a baseball game with his firefighter friends, and soon they kind of break out into a debate about what it means to be a firefighter, and if firefighters should be allowed to have a family if they know they can't always be there for them when there's an emergency happening. And it's an interesting exchange, but you kind of see where this is going here. Like, they even revealed in the trailer, like Steve Buscemi, again, perfect casting here, because Buscemi has actually worked with firefighters before, so he's like very much, he's in his element here. Like, sorry to bring it back to Big Lebowski. But like, he makes the big point about, hey, you know what? Heroes can have families too. They take on a lot, and and it's hard for them. And there's a lot of great sobering moments here too. Like a moment where Scott watches his friends, think that they can pull off a robbery, and the robbery turns terrible. Scott learns more about his father. Like, he learns that he wasn't quite a saint. Like, he partied like a little bit hard with drugs. So there's a lot of, like I said, very sobering moments here, and coming to closure with it. Now, my biggest problem with the film to that degree is that, here's the thing. The film runs over 2 hours, and a lot of it just it just seems like it's meandering towards this point. And like, there's a lot of really good scenes that build up Scott and his relationship with Ray and people he knows around him, and watching him sort of have like these hills and valleys of his life. And like, when there are hills, they're very, very small hills, like very small accomplishment. And then when he goes into valleys, they're dark and deep and depressive. But it just kind of feels like they never quite shoot up that high. Like, there are a lot of good scenes on their own, but it doesn't really feel like they build up to much. It just sort of feels like we're just sort of casually strolling along with this with this character who slowly comes to terms with his life. Like, there are a lot of cute scenes where Scott connects with Ray's children and tries to, essentially kind of like be a better father than Ray could for them, and tries to do the right thing and not just, give them tattoos and give them bad advice. Like, at one point, his earliest advice is always say you love somebody before you leave them, because you might end up dead the next day. That's pretty morbid advice, but eventually he comes around to both connecting with Ray and his kids, and even Ray's ex-wife, who seems like she could use a little bit of attention. Like, he kind of comes into his own, and he kind of like helps out people here. So like, I like the characters they have here, but a lot of these scenes, like I said, they don't really build up to much. Like, the huge moment where Scott and Ray connect is when they find some random guy in the street who's just like bleeding out of his gut, and they have to get him to the hospital. They have to help him, and it's very much like a team building moment. But it kind of comes out of, it seems like it kind of comes out of like left field here, because it just sort of like just happens. Like, this guy who's bleeding just comes into frame, when I kind of felt like, well, I almost wish like it happened like when they were on like the firefighter run, because then they could learn how to what the importance of like saving a life, and how important it is, and like better understanding your father. And it's especially troubling because like that scene ends so well too. Like, it starts off somewhat random, but it actually ends really nicely, where they reveal Scott's work with his tattoos, which become more personal. They become better, but they mean more now that he's trying his best. So yeah, like in terms of like melodrama, there are a few scenes here and there that work. In terms of comedy, there are a few laughs here and there. Like Burr feels strangely toned down for this film. Like and I almost kind of like that because we're usually used to seeing Bill Burr just like explode with fast dialogue and huge anger, and there is some of that anger here, but it feels mostly just kind of like toned down bitterness. Like it feels like this is Bill Burr, like after he's been through like, therapy and put on tranquilizers and mellowed out a little bit. Just a little bit here. So very, very understated Burr. So I kind of appreciate the film on that level. But it never really builds the way the way that I would like it to, just because it meanders so much in its 2.5 hours that we eventually get to the point that we kind of expect by the end, and we just kind of watch like a handful of some scenes that work and some scenes that don't, and trying to build up Scott as someone who has a life that is in desperate need of repair, and Ray, who, desperately needs to find, a reason to, raise kids and to like accept Scott as he is to make relationships work. I kind of dug the route that Scott's mother Margie took as well, where there's a moment where she's just said, you know what, I'm done with you, Scott. Whatever, I've tried to make things work, but it's, I'm just gonna live for me now. And you kind of like her on that level, because Scott's kind of a dick in this film. Like, he's very much a dick. Like, eventually, yes, he does learn from his ways. He does, it almost kind of feels like, but that's the thing. I almost wish like he fell harder so that he had more to build himself up from. And it feels like he's given a lot more opportunities here to succeed, especially after like so many failures, that it's very troubling to watch him just sort of like, shove away everything else because he's still haunted by the past. Being haunted by the past with his father is great melodrama, and I understand that. But like I said, it moseys and meanders all over the place, and just, you get a handful of interesting scenes and great characters, but not a whole lot to build it up towards the end, that I don't really feel like it justifies like the 2.5 hours. So I wish I could like this film more, especially because I do think Pete Davidson does have a future with these type of roles, but kind of like, the conflicted stoner, because he does play that stoner perfectly. He has, he definitely has that look and that cadence to make that sort of role work. But I also really dug his somberness and his unease, and just being deeply uncomfortable in a lot of scenes where it's clear he has like a lot of demons he hasn't quite wrestled with. So yeah, I hope to see more from Davidson. I hope to see more from Apatow. Interesting take on Burr. I really dug that. It feels like that this film just needs to stop meandering all over the place and find more to say and just have a better build. If it did that, I would actually really dig the film. But as a result, it's just a frustrating slog most of the time. So for the King of Staten Island, 2.5 out of 5 stars.